Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. And today is our first live episode. If you want to learn more about how to join us live, you can go to polarlifeconsulting.com/live and learn how to join this live podcast and also our schedule of upcoming guests. And this week for our first guest is Doug Carpenter, Dr. Doug Carpenter. And I've got a bio here from his book. He's an author, is one of his many things. This is Secret Shame, a survivor's guide to understanding male sexual abuse and male sexual development. And it says, Dr. Carpenter is a licensed psychologist in the state of Michigan. He and his spouse, Mary, are founders of Insight Counseling Services. Dr. Carpenter has a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the Forrest Institute of Professional Psychology, earned a Master of Science in Counseling and Substance Abuse Rehabilitation from Pace University, and has an Associates of Arts in Theological Studies from Kent Christian College. He has a keen ability to translate academic psychology and sound clinical research into clinic practice and in his writings. And that's very true. That's true in this Secret Shame book as well. He has extensive study and therapeutic skills in the area of gender role conflict, shame, sexual abuse, and trauma, and chemical and behavioral addictions. He enjoys reading, studying, research, church activities, playing the piano, spending time with his wife, Mary, 2 children, Dawson and Morgan, his daughter-in-law, Victoria, and his 3 Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, Louis, Bentley, and Camilla. So welcome to the Male Survivor podcast, Dr. Doug Carpenter. Yay!
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, and this is actually your 7th appearance on the podcast, which you didn't even realize.
I did not.
Yes, our co-led events with husband material for the Male Survivor Awareness Day, both for 2022 and again for 2023. I cropped those down into 3-part episodes. So you have 2 3-part episodes that you are a part of already, and those are part of the podcast. And so glad to have done those events with you. And I'm actually a little bit in his book. My poems are at the beginning of chapter 2, I believe. And that was a huge honor. And our friendship goes back a while, but I want to know more about you. You don't talk about your own story a lot. So I would really like to know more about you. But before we do that, we have what we call 4 questions. Now it's time for 4 questions, that part of the podcast when we get to know our guest a bit better by asking a few questions. Let's go. Yes, so we're going to get to know Doug. 4 questions. First, what is your favorite food memory?
What is my favorite food memory?
I know, because I love this question because we talk about triggers and so many are negative triggers, but there's positive triggers too that you can have, and smell and taste have such a profound, strong impact in our memories. So accessing those good memories too is something I like to ask my guests. So what is your favorite food memory?
Well, I would say one of my favorite food memories is probably early in my 20s when a girl I was dating, I dated for quite some time, took me out for my birthday to this really fancy steakhouse I think it was called the Charter House. And I think I had a 25-ounce steak. And it was absolutely delicious. And it was just a lot of fun. to spend the evening with her and another friend and his girlfriend, and it was just a fun eating experience that I happen to remember.
Excellent.
But I've had several fun eating experiences. So
Yeah. Excellent.
my wife and I like to fine dine, and so we have a lot of great food experiences as well.
That's wonderful. Good to know. What is your favorite Christmas or holiday memory?
Well, one of them just happened this past Christmas. So my daughter got me this bracelet, and if you look inside there, it's like a magnifying glass. There's a picture of me and my dad.
Oh, nice.
And so I get to carry him with me, and I can look in there and look at us anytime I want. So yes, she made me, I burst into tears when she gave it to me and told me to look through it, and I realized what it was.
Wow, that's nice. And you were close to your dad, right?
I was close to my dad, and he
Yeah.
just died in July.
Right. Yes, I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you.
That's extra special then for sure.
Yes, so that was very, very meaningful.
Excellent. Now, what is your favorite church memory?
My favorite church memory. This is probably really funny. So I have played the piano in church since I was 14 years old. And so this was when we lived in Springfield, Missouri, and we went to a church, and the platform was kind of rounded like this, and it had steps that went up to it. And so there was a black grand piano over here that I played, and it was at the end of the sermon, and the sermon had been kind of serious, and the whole tone was pretty serious, and I tripped walking up the stairs and fell right into the piano keyboard, and it just went boom. And of course everybody was like trying not to die laughing. And the minister just said, let's all take a moment and enjoy this moment. And then he just started laughing. So, so I basically had a whole church of people laughing at me because I had tripped and fallen up the stairs and into the piano. So that was one of my funniest, favorite memories of a church event, I would say. So that's pretty funny.
I love that. Yeah, for a pastor to say, yeah, I'm going to lose him, so we might as well just savor the moment.
Right.
And as I'm not going to get him back for a while, so let's let it out. And you
Definitely.
let it out, and then you can move on. And yeah, that's what you do. So
Right.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, what is your favorite scripture or any inspirational quote that has helped you on your spiritual journey? And what about it speaks to you?
I've always said that my favorite scripture is I believe it's Psalms, but delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. My wife and I had that printed on our napkins for our reception at our wedding, and that's just kind of been our theme verse. We kind of felt like that was true about God bringing us to each other, that he just gave us the desires of our heart. So that's been a special verse for us.
Nice.
And I actually have it hanging on my wall over there too.
Nice. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So, Doug, I know I've heard so much about your ministry and your work and your books, but I want to know more about you and your story. So, tell me about what it was like growing up, when your story as a survivor, how that all happened, uh, whatever you'd like to share. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. So I grew up in a very small town in Illinois, Southern Illinois. It was the name of it is Vandalia, Illinois. It's about 60 60 to 70 miles from St. Louis. My dad had a few different jobs. When I was born, he was a barber. And then at some point, he became a guard at a prison in our town. And then later bought a business in the town that was a burial and vault company. So we had a lot to do with the deaths in the community and burying people. My dad was a very hard worker. He worked about 12 hours a day. I didn't see him very much. He was pretty hands off, not very involved with us. And I would say that was difficult for me as a kid. I don't really have any early memories of him. In my first book, Childhood Trauma and the Non-Alpha Male, I talk about issues like father wounds, father hunger. I definitely had a longing for my dad when I was young, or the presence of a male figure, because I didn't have that. I think that made me somewhat vulnerable to later abuse then. I was believe it or not, I was very shy as a kid. I was pretty introverted. We kind of lived outside of city limits. There weren't really any kids around there. I didn't grow up in a block where there was a bunch of kids until later. A couple of kids moved in the neighborhood. So I spent a lot of time alone. I spent a lot of time just with my mother. She actually had someone else, another lady, come and get me and take me to my first day of kindergarten because she was afraid I wouldn't leave her.
Wow.
But I did. I don't remember having any problems. But the kindergarten teacher did call my mom at one point and ask her, like, because I just wouldn't hardly interact with other kids. I wouldn't play with the girls. I wouldn't play with the boys. I always just kind of played by myself. And so the teacher was a bit worried about me socially.
So are you still, it sounds like you were very much an introvert. Are you still an introvert?
Oh, Lord, no.
Because believe it or not, people have a hard time believing this. I am an introvert. They say it's how your batteries recharge. My wife is the opposite. When it needs her batteries recharged, she's on the phone talking to her sisters, to her friends, whatever, and that recharges her battery. Any kind of interaction for me, I need to cocoon. I need to go away in my shell. Okay,
Yeah.
then I can go out and face the world.
I definitely outgrew that and outgrew the shell I was in. I don't really know when that happened. Probably in adolescence, I started coming out of my shell and just was not shy and introverted too much. Not so much at church. At school, I was still somewhat quiet and reserved. Through grade school, I had one close friend. His name was Andy. But when I was in probably the third or fourth grade, he moved away. So that was really, really difficult for me. I felt very
You
much.
stayed in the same school growing up?
I did. Yep. I was at the same grade school for 5 years, went to middle school for the same school for 3 years, and then high school for 4 years.
Okay.
So I was at the same school. At some point between 5th and 6th grade, I made another male friend. He was a bit of an odd character. I don't know how or why we started hanging out. It actually may have been from Boy Scouts. I joined Boy Scouts for a while. I think he was a part of that. We may have started hanging out from that. He was kind of an engineering type kid. He liked to build things, liked to construct things. I wasn't much into that. But he was a male friend, and I didn't really have a male friend. So eventually I started going over to his house. Um, I was raised in a very naive Christian, pretty strict, fundamentalist type home. And I was not exposed to things of a sexual nature at all. We didn't talk about sex. Um, I just had no awareness of it. And when I went to this kid's house, uh, there were Playboy magazines everywhere. They were just all over the house. His stepdad had them, and they were everywhere. They were in the bathroom. They were on the coffee table. They were downstairs on the poker table. They were like everywhere. And
Wow.
so naturally, at that age, I'm just entering puberty, quite curious. Me and this other boy would sit around and look at these magazines. So that would be the first way I felt like I was sexually abused, like I was exposed to pornography, um, long before I had really any understanding of sex or I don't even know if I had a real interest or curiosity yet at that point, but that pornography definitely kind of turned that on.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Started
Maybe
making me feel very curious.
may not have necessarily been ready for it, but
No,
there it was.
yeah, I would definitely say I was not ready for it. I remember some of the crazy thoughts, like kind of feeling excited about some of the pictures that I was seeing, and then kind of also feeling like this is a little gross in some ways because some of the pictures were fairly graphic.
Right.
Um, so, like I said, that was probably the first way in which I felt like sexually abused. Not so much then, but as I look back
Right.
now, I think anytime you expose a child to pornography, that's sexual abuse, and that is definitely defined as sexual abuse by most laws in most states.
Right.
Uh,
And
um,
what we call that non-contact abuse, right?
right, that is non-contact abuse. There's contact abuse, non-contact abuse.
Right.
So then, as part of that, um, I'm laying in bed with this kid one night, and he asked me, "Hey, I do something to myself that feels really good. Can I do it to you?" And I said, yes. I didn't know what he was going to do. I didn't know what was going to happen. Um, and what happened is he actually masturbated me to ejaculation.
Wow. And how old
Uh,
were you at that time?
Between 11 and 12.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, I was shocked. I didn't know what had happened. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought, did he break it? Just kind of the
Yeah.
normal thoughts that I think a lot of boys have that at their first orgasm.
Right. Exactly.
I remember, I can't necessarily say that I thought it was pleasurable. I just knew like something weird was happening, and I had no context to put it in. I just had no
Right.
idea.
Right.
Um, I think I felt a little terrified after that. It took me several days to kind of figure out what had happened. I mean, I was a pretty smart kid. I was taking biology. I kind of knew some of the words and kind of figured out that this was semen, and what he had done to me was, somehow got that to come out of my body.
Right.
Um, so that was the first part that taught me about masturbation too. So then I started masturbating on my own. Well, I wondered if I could get that to happen on my own. If I did to myself what he did to me.
Right.
So I did that, and so that's when I started masturbating. Was somewhere between age 11 and 12. Um, and this continued to happen with this friend. And I look back and can tell you that I felt like I needed to continue to let this happen for me to be able to be his friend and to have a friend.
Right.
And then he eventually introduced me to another boy who then did the same thing to me. Um, I've I felt a lot of confusion around those events. Um, like I said, I felt like I had to do that to maintain a friendship with him, and I wanted to have a male friend.
Right.
But I will tell you that for years and years and years, I did not ever use the term for myself that I was sexually abused. I would look back on that and think that was just sexual exploration. Um, I think what confused that for me is because he asked me if he could do something to me, and I said yes.
Right. So you consented, even though now, as adults, we know children cannot consent to sexual acts,
Right.
especially someone
Children
so
cannot
young
consent.
who doesn't even know what they're consenting to.
I did not know what I was consenting to whatsoever. And even after it happened, I didn't know what I had consented to. I didn't know what this was.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned about not labeling it as sexual abuse, that is also very common, that men
Yes.
who were abused don't even use that or know that label applies to their situation. And it's not until
Right.
a long time before they realize, ooh, no, that's not good. That's not right. That's not healthy.
Well,
Oh,
because I
dang, wait,
think
is that abuse?
we think about sexual abuse as an old man with a little boy.
Exactly.
You know, and
Exactly.
there's lots and lots and lots of different scenarios that would constitute sexual abuse. Now, do I, and this is where this somewhat gets gray. Um, I don't feel like this other boy had any ill intent toward
Right.
me. Like,
Right.
I don't think he was trying to hurt me. I don't think he was trying to control me. I think he was also being abused in that home by the amount of pornography exposure that was there. So in
Exactly.
some ways, I felt like we were co-victims of his stepdad, and then I became a victim of his because he had more sexual knowledge to some degree, and then exposed me to further things.
And I think that intent talks a lot about who the real perpetrator is, because in that instance, it's whoever abused him is the real perpetrator, because that then educated him about those acts. And then you act out these things, not
Yeah,
knowing that they're necessarily bad, because that's part of the grooming process as well, because it's
right.
normal.
Yeah, and
And
back in
so,
that day, 40 years ago at this point,
right,
I don't think that stepfather had really any ill intent either. I think he was a businessman in town. He owned a business. He drank a lot. He had porn laying around. I think he just thought he was a cool guy, and that, having Playboy in your house was almost like a status symbol.
and maybe he got that from his own father.
And maybe.
Right.
So I don't think there was. Oh, here's what I think. I remember his stepdad making a couple of comments about the magazines laying around to him in front of me, and it was almost like, boy, this is the way you get your education. So I think his stepdad probably thought he in some way he was doing this kid a favor by letting him have access to pornography, and so he could figure life out and figure sex out.
Right.
So I don't think his stepdad had any real malicious intent there either. But you know, uh, we know now that it's not healthy to expose children to pornography.
Right, for sure. Yes.
So I think it's because of all those reasons why, because there was no intent. Um,
So
and
injury occurred.
that I consented,
Right.
that I never really labeled the whole thing as abuse until many, many years. I did have the thought, though, um, as the years progressed, as I got into the field of psychology, I thought, wow, I have a lot of, I would tell myself this, I have a lot of symptoms of people who've been sexually abused, but I've never been sexually abused.
So how old were
Um,
you when you started to get the revelation? It's like, oh, that actually was sexual abuse. Boom. Well, how old were you when that happened?
Probably toward the end of my doctoral program. So probably when I was between 28 and 30, I started having some thoughts um, about maybe what I did experience was abuse. I think part of that came about because I took a class in college that was all about childhood sexual abuse. That sparked me doing my dissertation on the topic of childhood sexual abuse and the disparity among the laws at that time and the disparity among the definitions of abuse. Um, and I started reading a lot about trauma, and a lot of the work that I was doing in my doctoral program was ended up because I had a master's degree that was specialized in drug and alcohol rehabilitation. So I knew a lot about addiction and the addiction cycle. So when I went to work at the county jail there, I ended up seeing most of the sex offenders that were there. And we kind of treated them from an addiction standpoint. So then I became more and more intrigued by the field of sexual addiction, sexual trauma. And that's when I think I started realizing that, hey, what I went through sexually had way more of an impact and maybe a negative impact on me than I was ever willing to admit or to understand. So that kind of got me thinking more along those lines because I started thinking about, had I never went to that kid's house, I probably really never would have been exposed to pornography till much later. Um, I don't even know how I would have been exposed to it. There was nothing like that in my home. I do remember that one time I was playing with a neighborhood kid, and we found his dad's stash of porn in the basement. And for a few days, we kind of looked at that. So that probably would have been my other exposure had I not been exposed by them being at this kid's house all the time.
Right.
But I lived a pretty sheltered life. I would say as an adolescent, I became overly kind of interested in things of a sexual nature. I masturbated quite often and quite frequently. I think having had that early sexual experience like that just turned a switch on in me that left me very curious. It also, I think, was difficult because I had longed so much for the attention of a male because my dad really didn't pay much of attention to us. And the reason for that was my dad was raised on a semi farm. His dad basically worked him from the time he was like 5 years old on. So my dad grew up in a fairly physically, emotionally abusive environment. And my dad always swore, if I ever have kids, I'm just going to let my kids be kids and I'm going to leave them alone. So that's basically what my dad did. He got up and he would go to work at least 12 hours a day and ignored us. And in his mind, he was doing us a favor. He was being a good dad by not making us work and being a slave driver like his dad was. But he later, in my adult years, came to realize that that was not the effective way to have fathered children, and that he had really emotionally kind of neglected us. And he made amends for that and asked for forgiveness of that. And we had a wonderful relationship throughout my adult years. But in childhood, I really longed for that. And so I think that made me even more susceptible when this boy started doing this to me, that I was willing to go back because it was at least some attention, some affection from another male.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
So how you said you seem to be more sexually aware or interested in sexual things. How did that show itself?
I think I then started looking for ways to find pornography. Back then they sold it at 7-Eleven.
Yep,
I
remember those
would
days. Yep.
I would grab the magazine and run to the back of the store and look at it. I think I just felt very intrigued and curious then, and would want to look up words in the encyclopedia, just try to find any magazine that had anything sexual or pictures in it, or I think I spent a lot of time fantasizing. I can't say that I ever did anything deviant or that was way out of the norm. I think I was just too preoccupied with it. You know, but I also look back and think some of that also could have been that my dad wasn't present. He never taught us how to play ball. I never understood most sports because he never played them with us. No one ever explained the rules. It seemed like at school, you were just expected to already have known the rules. And they would just throw you in a game, and I would have no clue what was going on. I was not
totally
was not very coordinated either. So I was usually picked last for any sports team that I was being forced to participate in.
Me too.
So sports was not a pleasant experience for me. I just did not enjoy them at all. And I still don't necessarily enjoy them. The only sport I ever enjoyed was tennis, and that was like a solo thing. I didn't have to play on a team. I could just
Interesting.
I was good at it on my own. I didn't need anybody else on my side of the court.
For me, it was volleyball. I loved volleyball,
Okay,
especially as an adult, because it's a team. You're constantly rotating positions, and I had basic skills, and I was like, all right, I could hold my own, and it's a sport I understood. And so, and I think church and college I went to had a volleyball team, and I was actually on the team, so that was like cool. And I never really been on a team like that before. Wanted to ask you, and you don't have to answer if you feel it's too personal, but when did you start acting out with others in school or as a young adult? You were initiating or?
I didn't until I was, I think the first time I ever did anything sexual was probably around the age of 19.
Okay.
So.
Now, did you have like girlfriends or anything when you were in middle school or high school, or?
I did not. I never dated. I didn't really see myself as the dateable type. I was not an alpha male. I wasn't overly masculine. I didn't play sports. My senior year, there was a girl from our chorus class that became interested in me. And I think I took her out on a date in like November. I was interested in her, but I had arranged, because I hated school so much. I didn't hate school. I hated being at school. I hated the social aspect of school. I had worked my way up to where I was graduating early. So I took her out on a date in November. In December, I was done with high school. And in January, I went halfway across the United States to go away to college. So I actually had to fly home from college to graduate high school at the end of the year. So I didn't act out in any way in high school. And when I went across the United States, I went to seminary, so I did not act out there. It wasn't until I was in what was considered secular school that I began some experimentation.
Interesting. So did you have like any
And I would say that it was in my later college years that that was in the early 90s. So there were video stores on every corner. And I now lived alone. And so that's when I think I really developed kind of an addiction to pornography, because I would go to the video store and just get videos. And again, I think that was that preoccupation of all things sexual, and being raised in a very fundamental home in church. There was very purity culture was huge at that point.
Right.
So like, you even thought about a girl in that way, and you might as well open the pits of hell and just crawl in.
Exactly.
So I was definitely raised in a whole purity culture environment where I felt like I could not think sexual thoughts about girls, or that would just be, terribly sinful. So the more you try to repress that, of course, the more it tends to come to the surface. So, being able to sneak pornography from the video store around the corner when I lived alone was, a perfect way to feed my curiosity without anyone ever knowing about it.
And this is the 90s, so no internet, so no easy access, but you had it on every corner. Yeah, that was never,
Well, and I lived in New
never a
York.
thing for that. Oh yeah,
So
you had everything on every corner.
Yeah,
pretty much.
New York, yeah. There was nothing wanting in New York. So
right. Yeah, and the open all night for everything.
Right. Yeah, which I never did that. I never went to clubs. I never went to bars. I never had anonymous sex with anybody. I never, my abuse never led me down that road.
Right.
Anytime I was involved with someone, it was in the guise of a relationship, but yet it was still going against my morals at the time of being a Christian. But I felt like I had this kind of burning desire that had been turned on inside of me, and I didn't know how to shut it down.
Exactly. Now let's switch gears. Tell me about your healing journey, when especially you finally around age 20 realized, oh gosh, that was sexual abuse. And then you're seeing all these symptoms, just like these abuse people have. I have similar symptoms. So when did you start digging down and figuring out how to heal yourself, as you're already starting the process of learning how to heal others?
Yeah.
How much inward were you doing that, or getting help from others and realizing, yeah, I need to work on my own stuff?
I did a lot of reading. I was and still am to some degree a voracious reader. I love to read. I wish I had lots more time to sit and read. But I read a lot of books on trauma, on how to work with trauma, about addiction, about healing, because I have worked my whole career with sexual addiction, sexual trauma, sexual deviance. So I've just read and read and read and read lots of books. And what often would try to apply that information to my own life as well. but I would also say that the church world that I'm involved in is still not very forthcoming with talking about these types of issues.
Right. Right. Yeah, they kind of squirm their seat when the topic comes up, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So throughout my adult life, I would have occasional relapses with pornography. Um, most of the time, nobody really knew about that. A couple of times, my wife was aware of it. Um, and then in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I really struggled. I think I was under an enormous amount of stress. The rest of the world wasn't working. I was working night and day and around the clock 7 days a week
Right.
because people were home in their homes alone, and people were fighting, and marriages were falling apart, and
Oh,
people were
yeah.
relapsing from alcoholism, and people were suicidal, and people were having their loved ones drop dead from COVID and couldn't say goodbye, and grieving, and healthcare workers who were scared to death to go to work. And I was literally working around the clock day and night.
Wow.
And it just got too much. And I relapsed myself uh, back into pornography. And then I went to a Facebook group, I think, for men who were struggling with sexual things. And I met a guy named Matt McCullough there. And Matt was in Cambodia, actually. And I was in the US. And I asked him if I could talk to him. And he said yes. So we started
Oh,
FaceTiming. And he's a missionary, so he kind of gets some of the
right.
same pressure and stress. And so he was somebody I could relate to. In the midst of our kind of friendship, he came across husband material right as it was getting started, right
Yep.
as Drew was starting it.
Yep.
And
I was in the same support group, and I remember that, and that's what got
yes,
me in there too. Yeah.
right. It was called Saved Sons or
Um,
something.
there's several. I think it was the Calibro or Calibrate.
Okay, yes, there I was in that one too. So anyway,
But and he every single group he was involved with, and I saw his posts on several of those support groups
yeah,
on
yeah,
Facebook that he shared
yeah,
this information about husband material.
right. And so he introduced me to husband material. So I became involved with that group pretty quickly and really felt a real kindred spirit with Drew and with what I was seeing from the leaders there and the things they were talking about and the things that they were posting. And it just felt like a really healthy environment. There was just this weird sense like I have found my people.
Ah, yeah, yeah, for sure. I know
And
we had already met on the group, and you had already asked me to put my poem in your book before the HM stuff. So this was, yeah, must have
yes,
been early 2020, 2019, 2020,
yeah,
somewhere in there.
yeah. So I had been working on a book about sexual abuse of men because,
And then
um,
all that craziness of COVID on top of you trying to get this book out, and then all this other stuff piling up on top of you. So that's just extra stress.
yes, yeah, it was just a very, very stressful time. And so, I felt like um, husband material really gave me an outlet to number one make friends that I felt like I could really relate to. Men that were struggling with similar things that I was struggling with or had struggled with. Um, and I kind of immediately became sober again and went right back into, being the person that I want to be
Right. Right.
versus where, 2020 had kind of taken me for a couple of months.
Yeah.
So
I could really relate to that in the overworking during COVID. I know I wasn't in mental health care, but doing interpreting, and I worked with phone calls, and everyone was at home. Everyone was making phone calls. All of work happened over the phone. Our volume like almost doubled with the calls that we had to process working
Mhm.
with deaf
Yeah,
people. And yeah, I ended up boosting my hours from my normal 36 to 40, which doesn't seem like much, but it's that much extra mental work and so
yeah.
forth. I was just exhausted. And I actually caused damage, physical damage from the interpreting. And it was just so stressful. But you also, okay, there's nothing else to do. So you might as well work. But
Well,
yeah,
that was kind of my
unfortunately,
mindset. Like, I'm
yeah,
not one to just lay around and do nothing. Like, um,
and there's a need. So it's like,
there
might
was
as
a
well.
need. Yeah. And I kept
Yeah.
getting contact. Like, can you talk to me? Can you talk to me? Can I see you? You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So I just, and part of it, this is no blame on my wife either, but we had to move our business into our home, and we were running our business out of our home, and we were both just kind of working around the clock through all that,
Right. Yeah.
and so it was a lot of stress on both of us.
Oh,
It was a difficult time,
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
but
Um,
I'm really, really happy to find husband material and have absolutely loved being a part of it ever since Matt introduced it to me.
Likewise. Yeah. Matt changed our lives for sure. Yeah, yay,
Yes.
Matt. Um, and let's see, I'm going to open it up to our audience as well. Audience members, again, if you have any questions, put that in the Q&A. And if you want us to say your name, actually manually type that. Otherwise, we'll just say one of our audience members said, dot, dot, dot. So if you have any questions you'd like to pose to Doug, feel free. Now's the time. And also, if you want to ask it live, either audio only or audio and video, let me know and we can upgrade your status temporarily while you pose that question and get the answer. So that's always an option. And while you're doing that, so what are you working on now? I know you have this Secret Shame book that's been wonderful, and I use it with my own coaching practice, especially the workbook. There's so many practical, hands-on things with the workbook that is so helpful
Yeah.
for men trying to deal with all of this. It's been a wonderful tool. Uh,
Thank you. Thank you so
so,
much.
I believe you are working on a new book now, aren't you?
I am. So my first book was Childhood Trauma in the Non-Alpha Male. My second book was Secret Shame, and then the workbook that went along with it. And my next book that I'm working on is Arousal versus Desire. And
Okay.
it's there's a podcast, about a 15-20 minute podcast in HM that's labeled Arousal versus Desire, that came out of the sexual abuse seminar. It was called Healing from Sexual Abuse. That was
Yes.
a virtual retreat that we did a couple years ago through
Yes.
HM. And so the premise of that book is that basically God created our sexual desire. That's the part of us that holds our deepest longings, our longings to be married and have children, and live incongruent with our core self and our spirituality. And then our sexual arousal pattern looks at, where have we been conditioned? How have our wounds that we've had in life become eroticized and sexualized? And what, how has that woundedness laid a foundation for um, later sexual problems
Right.
that take our development awry, or to a place that we don't want it, or a condition to things that we don't want? Just like sexual abuse would be one of those wounds that creates conditioning in us and longings in us that we wouldn't have naturally had had that event not taken place.
Right. And I think that's so profound. And I've heard from so many survivors who have heard that desire template or an arousal template.
Yeah.
It just paints such a clear picture, and then it's like, boom, the light bulb goes off. It finally makes sense. Why
Yeah, because
I do the things I do, think things I think, but that's not what I want. But I do, and that's the scripture. I mean, Paul said that. I do the things that I don't want to do, and
right.
all of that. Right.
So that, yeah, that arousal pattern then can be very confusing, like especially for somebody who's been sexually abused. If you've been abused by someone of the same sex, your sexual template now involves a male and a male body and a penis and being touched by a man. And as you grow into adulthood, that can create certain longings or desire to look at certain types of pornography or be engaged in certain types of behavior that you don't even understand why you like it. Like, why do I want this when I identify as heterosexual? Or why do I think about this? Or why do I want to watch this kind of porn? Or, but it's because what has happened to that template, sexual information was written on that template that we weren't originally designed to have, and goes against what God desires for us.
Right. And for survivors, there's such a strong desire to reenact the abuse. That's a very common theme, and that goes to
Oftentimes,
that arousal template. So if you have experienced anal sex or oral sex, trying to reenact that, having that desire, that it's almost a drive
yes,
to, it's like your mind making sense of it. And I think that's why boys who experience abuse act out with other boys, because it's like their mind's trying to resolve that conflict of that traumatic experience that they're trying to make sense of. So let me act it out and
yeah.
try to
And
resolve it.
I talk in the book about, there's a whole chapter in there about the work of Dr. Patrick Carnes and how he developed 8 different trauma bonds. So you have to take a look at, how did a person bond to their trauma, and then what kind of reaction are they having from that? Are they having a PTSD reaction? Do they repeat the trauma or trauma repetition, trying to almost like the definition of insanity? You keep doing the same thing over and over, hoping for a different result, or that you're going to wind up with some insight, or that somehow you're going to, the outcome is going to be different this time, and you're going to resolve that wound. So you have to look at how you've bonded to your trauma. Maybe you've bonded to the person. That's called a trauma bond in itself. Like, maybe you surround yourself with people who are dangerous for you, because that's what you became accustomed to as a child. Maybe your perpetrator was threatening or beat you or controlled you through severe coercion and manipulation. And so now you're addicted to having people like that in your life.
Exactly.
You have to look at how you bonded to these traumas and how they're causing you to recreate various scenarios in your life.
A lot of those things are very subconscious as well.
Very subconscious.
It's like, yeah. We do have a question. I'm going to project it, see what happens.
Sure.
Projecting, yes, project. Here we go. This is Ed. I'm curious about something Doug mentioned about turning on a switch. Is there any known physiology that once masturbation is discovered, that a young boy becomes quickly addicted to it to the point of being insatiable? My CSA broke me and quickly learned to recreate the end experience of the moment, and eventually buried the CSA, but not the obsessive need to reach the desired results.
Yeah, and I mean, there definitely is some research that shows that anytime that there's high levels of arousal, high level of emotion, levels of intensity and fear and risk that are involved, that somehow the brain chemistry is much more significant during those times, and it like stamps that memory into the brain and creates
Right.
immediate neural pathways.
Right. All those synapses just
Yeah,
make those new connections, and it's like, wow.
it then
Oh,
causes you to want to recreate that. And I mean, you know, anything that you pair with orgasm is highly strengthened, because orgasm is very much of a big brain chemistry reaction. You know, it's not just what comes out your penis; it's
right.
all the chemicals that go on in this head. You
Yep.
know, and what it does for you, and it, you know, in your limbic system,
Right.
in the what's called the reward center of the brain, the dopamine is really a main culprit there. Cortisol, or the cortisone. Oh, there's another one. I'm thinking that
The
I'm
cortisol.
yeah. There's also
And
an, oxytocin.
yeah.
There's all kinds of chemicals that are released in that reward center that then um, cause that memory to be chased after,
Right.
and they're definitely increased during orgasm. So then your brain says, "Hey, that felt good. I want some more of that."
It's like, put that in the special file. So yeah, I can get.
Yeah.
I want to access this again.
So
And
I do think for some boys, um, that switch comes on, you know, because of right combination of events, and that then trigger the right combination of brain chemicals that then flip that switch on, and then it can be very difficult to switch off. So I hope that answered that question for
yes.
Ed. But yes, that is very true. I have worked with abusers or abuse victims and survivors for over 25 years now, and a lot of them will tell you that their childhood sexual abuse flipped a switch on for them, turned on their sex drive at a very young age, most of the time in a latency period. Latency period is 6 years to 12 years old. And if you read in my book, the average age for male sexual abuse is 8 and 9 years old. And so that's right in that middle of that latency period where our brains are not cognitively ready for or mature enough to process sexual information. But it's
Yeah.
like when something sexual happens to us that age, it's almost like we are given a huge piece of chocolate cake. Like, you can't not devour it, even if you don't want to eat it. Like, there's something there that um, kicks in curiosity and craving that again. Like, I hear this from survivors all the time. You know, I quote in the book that there's a study that shows that a lot of sexually abused men do not come forward for 25 years after their abuse. And I definitely have found that to be very, very true. I think the occurrence of male sexual abuse, because our genitalia is so external and because orgasm is external and it's such a strong and powerful experience, I think we get very confused about, well, this felt good. It felt, I kind of liked it, but this was not supposed to be happening.
Right. And
Like,
where's the line of consent?
right. And that's where I talk in my book about body betrayal.
Right.
Some survivors will feel that sense of body betrayal because, like, I don't want this. I'm not ready for this, but my body is responding and it feels good. And now I'm confused. And so I can't, if I liked what happened to me or if it felt good, I can't say that I was abused. Well, I tell people all the time, your body does not know the difference between abuse, sex, and intimacy.
Mhm.
Your skin just responds to touch.
Yeah.
You know, and I've even had men tell me, well, I knew what my perpetrator was going to do to me, and I kept going back to him. And sometimes I even initiated it with him.
Mhm.
And you're right, because you have bonded to that person. That person groomed you. They set you up to love them, to enjoy spending time with them. They groom you to like to spend time with them. They sexually abuse you to get the sexual gratification they want, but also at the cost of your sexuality as well, because they turn that on for you and you don't know what to do with that. So you're bonded to the experience, you're bonded to the person, you're bonded to the feelings that you have for the perpetrator, because 90% of sexual abuse cases are people are sexually abused by someone that they're very close to and that they know very well. I think we've all had, I think society, I think TV, if you think about sexual abuse, it's some dirty old man who abuses you in a bathroom in a park somewhere that you don't know. That's
Right.
very
Or
rare, actually.
lures you into a van with candy, and
Right. Yeah. We want to tell kids about stranger danger all the time, but we don't want to talk about, the incest that's happening inside of a family.
Mhm.
A good portion of childhood sexual abuse is intrafamilial.
Right.
It's somebody known to the child, or it's some type of family member. It may be an older sibling.
Yeah. And also the organizational related, where it's scouts or church or
Yes, it's some
school.
kind of environment where it's supposed to be a trusted environment.
Right. Athletics, all these things where there's just historical,
Yes.
institutionally supported abuse. Yeah. Got another comment from Ed. Let me put that up. Ed says, thanks. That's very comforting. I was 13 a week after my 13th birthday, and the experience with a stranger in a
Oh,
bathroom terrified me, and I wanted to make it become a nice thing and searched for the nice version of what happened.
mm,
Yeah, the reenacting,
yes,
and trying to flip the script, to
yes,
rewrite the ending. It's like that's
absolutely.
almost why it's like that desire to reenact it, hoping for a better ending. It's like your mind wants to just play it over and over and over until, oh, we get the good ending now. And then
Yes,
you're done, but you never get the good ending. And so you're
right.
constantly replaying it. Yeah. Yeah. And you found
True.
that common in your research as well, right?
I did. I did.
Yeah. And let's see. If there's no other questions, anything else you feel you want to share, Doug, that we haven't touched on?
The thing that I would touch on is knowing the impact of this in my own life. I worked really hard to educate my children.
Yes.
Um, I Before my children would spend the night anywhere or go somewhere where they were not going to be in my care for a while, I would talk to them from a very young age um, that nobody touches you in parts of your body where you wear your swimming suit.
Mhm.
No. And if they do, it's okay. You just come and tell dad, because that's an adult problem. It's not a your problem. You're not responsible for that. You just need to tell another adult, as soon as you can. And you for sure tell me as soon as you see me if somebody tries to touch you in your bathing suit parts. But that's an adult problem. And I just made them very comfortable with that idea and let them know that that was my responsibility and that it was something they didn't have to carry around. And I had that talk with them many times. Like when they would go to spend the night with someone, I would kind of have this talk with them. I when they began to get old enough to know what pornography was, I educated them about, people showing them pictures or showing them things that, that dad wouldn't show them, and to be open with coming and talking to me about that. And, I think we have to actively be good parents. You cannot passively be a good parent.
Right. And brings up another topic that we didn't touch on. How did the abuse experience inform your parenting? Was one area, but
I tried not to overreact for
right,
my kids. I tried to react appropriately. I didn't instill enough information in them to scare them. And I also didn't, like, when we had these conversations, make a big deal, like it was something catastrophic. I just tried to make, even when I educated them about sex, I, I just talked like we were talking about the weather. It was just very factual. Um, I just tried to create a very open dialogue around those issues that seemed very normal, that it was not taboo. It was not something that we could not talk about. When my kids started to go to puberty, I explained puberty to them. I talked to them about the changes that were going to happen in their body. I talked to my son about masturbation. I tried to just be a very present father.
right. Now you
And
also didn't really, well, I guess at that point you knew that what happened to you was abuse, but did that um, frighten you to even become a parent, that you might bring that negativity or bring that abuse to your own children?
um,
Or
I would say in my early 20s, I did not want children.
Hmm.
Because I thought, with everything I had lived through, the struggles that I had faced, the social rejection I had faced, I just thought, I don't want anything to do with trying to raise a child. And I felt like, not having my dad around, that I sure didn't know how to raise a boy, for sure.
right.
So what God do? The first kid he gave me was a boy.
Oh, he did. He was nice to me. I got a girl first, and then I got a
Um,
boy second. So
but and this just had to be biology and God, I guess. When I was 28, I just started getting this like deep desire to have some little thing call me dad. Like it just turned on for me. And I don't know if I had just reached a point where I had started to heal, that God was just changing my heart, or if it was just my biological clock setting in, or a combination of those things. But no, I didn't, once I was ready to have children, I didn't feel afraid about having children. I never ever once had the sense that, oh, this happened to me. What if I do this to my children? Which the research shows, you know, people
right.
who are not abused, a very tiny percent of people who are abused become abusers.
So that isn't well known, and so many of us fear becoming parents because, oh my gosh, what have I become?
Right.
Or people who find out will assume that I am.
Yes. Yes. Which the research does not back that up at all.
Right.
I never one time had an inclination to do something to my children. In fact, it
Right.
caused me to want to love them and protect them, but not, I was not a helicopter parent. I didn't overprotect my kids.
Right. Yeah.
I tried to be the parent that I would have wanted. I tried to have the conversation with my kids that I would have wanted someone to have with me, and tried to create an openness with my kids where that if something did happen, they were free to come and tell me.
Right. We got another question. Let me project this. This is from one of our listeners, from one of our audience members. How does a dad reconcile not having this tall with a 22-year-old son because he was ashamed of his own past and
This
didn't
this
have
talk, this
this
talk
talk?
with
Oh, not
yeah,
having this talk. Thank you.
yeah, not having this talk with a 22-year-old son.
Because he was ashamed of his own past and didn't have the tools at the time of the son's youth to bring it up. What can be done with a young adult now that dad can approach this healthily? Um,
I don't think it's ever too late to have a discussion with your children.
right,
I think that you can sit down with this 22-year-old son and say, when you were developing, this is where I was, and I wasn't at a place where I could talk about this and have this discussion with you. And I want to apologize to you that if you felt like I wasn't there for you in a time when you needed me. And,
right,
I'm not sure in which ways that you learned about sex or, were exposed to things. If you felt like I didn't protect you, I apologize for that. I think you just approach it with humility, humbleness, and openness and authenticity, uh, and try to be very present for your children now. I had said that when I was 21, my dad made amends with me about my childhood, and it had nothing to do with sex
right.
or abuse, but it was about neglect from him.
Mm,
He because we had no relationship when I was 21, and I didn't really
right,
want anything to do with him. I didn't really care that much about him. He realized that the approach that he had taken through my childhood kind of backfired. And so
right,
he sat down and explained his own life and why he took the role that he did
mm,
throughout my childhood. And that gave me a lot of insight and understanding into him, and that, what he did that was damaging and hurtful to me, he was actually trying to do out of protection and love.
right.
And he approached me in such a humble way, in a genuinely apologetic way, that it softened my heart
Mm,
toward him.
mm,
And then
that's
he
nice.
expressed very much that he wanted to have a relationship with me and was willing to do whatever it took to try to mend our adult relationship. And I had 30 some years of a wonderful relationship with my dad.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
So I think
And
we never do everything right as a parent.
we're imperfect people.
We are imperfect people, and we do things to hurt our children. All our kids will end up in therapy at some point. It's
Yep. Yep.
it didn't used
Or
to
if
tell
not,
me
they
that,
should be.
yeah, when my kids would complain about something, I would be like, well, tell your therapist. And they would say, Dad, I don't have a therapist. I'd say, but you will.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yep. Very true. Very, very true.
Right. So I think
So,
we just
mhm,
stop and admit what we didn't do right and embrace what we did right, ask for forgiveness for what we didn't, triumph what we did right, and we just keep moving. And you be authentic and loving and honest and real with your kids. And I don't think it's too late. If you go to your kids and authentically express yourself in a loving, gentle, genuine way, I think that's always going to lead to a positive outcome.
right, right,
It's taking the risk to do that.
right. And they will hopefully appreciate your honesty
Yeah.
and vulnerability for sure.
Yeah.
And it should hopefully deepen that relationship.
Yeah.
Think
Because
that's
when my kids were in their early 20s, I sat down and told them my story and just said, this is why dad raised you in some of the ways that I did. This is
mm,
why we could freely talk about sex in our house. This is why we could freely ask questions
mm,
and not be embarrassed about it in our house.
right, right. Yeah, that's good. I had a similar talk with my kids when they were late teens, and they knew my story and so forth, and then things made sense.
Yeah,
Oh, that's why Dad reacted about certain things in certain ways. It's like, yep,
right, right.
yep. And they're pretty smart. They already knew stuff had gone down, and they knew something was there that I just wasn't telling them, and so they kind of figured it out or made assumptions. And then when I finally told them, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, all
Well,
right,
the
that
other
makes
thing
sense.
was I was starting to pump out these books about childhood trauma and sexual abuse, and
Yeah,
I felt like I needed to sit down and tell my kids, "Hey, this Dad's career is kind of headed in this direction, and here's why."
right. Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well,
And I was
thank
starting to
you.
do a lot of broadcasts or a podcast about my own story, and I thought,
Yeah,
my kids need to hear all this from me first.
right.
So,
Yeah. Well, thank you, Doug, for sharing your wisdom and your story with us. How can we find you on the interwebs?
um, my author page is douglascarpenter.com.
Hmm.
And so you can reach me through my website. You can email me there. There's a contact page. You can order my books from that website. So that would probably be the easiest and the quickest way to reach me.
Then you've got your counseling group. What's the website for that? And what areas do you serve for that? Is that just the Michigan State only?
So that's Insight Counseling Services, and the website is insightcounselingpc.com. Um, I can see people in about 27 states at this point,
Okay.
because of a special license that I have to do that with. But we have 17 clinicians at our office, but I'm the only one that can see people across state lines because of the type of license that I have.
Right.
Um, most of our clinicians are master's level people, and the master's level ability to practice across state lines is just now really starting to pick up more.
Right, especially post COVID, that yeah seemed to be a huge need, and people
Yes.
are actually thinking more about their mental health because
Yeah.
COVID forced us to face those kinds of demons in our lives.
Yeah.
And so many people are looking at that need for sure. I know you're also a certified husband material coach on
Well, I was going to
husbandmaterial.com.
say, if you're a member of Husband Material, you can always DM me there. You can find my profile, very easy there.
And they
And
have a lot of free options as well within husband material, again, husbandmaterial.com. And I'll put all
yes,
these links in the show notes. And let's see. And I think that's it. And again, if you want to join us on one of our live podcast events, you can get our schedule of upcoming guests and instructions on how to join at polarlifeconsulting.com/live. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Life Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarlifeconsulting.com. That is polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.